This week, we speak with Sandy Carielli from Forrester Research. In the news segment, some SDKs siphon social data. Browsers continue to balance privacy and precision. We return to SSRF and more. Stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV courses live and on demand, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Team subscriptions include Pro Portal, so managers have full control over your team's training schedule. Go to itpro.tv/ASW and use the code ASW30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 87, recorded December 2nd, 2019. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with Matt Alderman.
Happy Cyber Monday. Hey, happy Cyber Monday and credit card fraud alert day. I'm 2 for 2 already this morning. That's why I said it. So.
Sounds good. I guess we can say they're both happy and cross our fingers. We'll see. We do need everyone to register for our upcoming webcast with Steve Lobenstein of Core Security by going to securityweekly.com. Click the webcast dropdown and select registration. If you have missed any of our previously recorded webcasts, you can find our on-demand library by selecting On Demand from the webcast dropdown. If you attend any of our webcasts, you will receive 1 CPE credit per webcast. We're currently running our annual listener feedback survey. Please visit securityweekly.com, click the survey tab, and select 2019 Listener Survey to submit your responses. Our guest today is Sandy Carielli. She's a Principal Analyst at Forrester, advising security and risk professionals on application security, with a particular emphasis on the collaboration among security and risk, application development, operations, and business teams. Her research covers topics such as proactive security design, security testing in the software delivery lifecycle, protection of applications in production environments, and remediation of hardware and software flaws. Sandy has over 15 years of experience in the security industry, working in software engineering, consulting, product management, and technology strategy roles. Her most recent experience was at Entrust Data Card, where she guided the organization's technology strategy and researched the impact of emerging technologies on the business. Prior to that, Sandy was Director of Product Management at RSA, where she was responsible for the Secure ID and data protection portfolio. Sandy spent 4 years as a consultant at Stake, where she conducted application architecture assessments, penetration tests, and code reviews. Sandy began her career as a software engineer at BBN Technologies and Cyber Trust Solutions. She's the co-author of the Industrial Internet Consortium's IoT Security Maturity Model and has spoken at RSA Conference, Source Boston, ISA International, and many other regional security events. And with that, I want to welcome you, Sandy. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, Mike, and happy Cyber Monday indeed. This is a timely conversation, I think.
It is, because what we're going to dive into, even though we've gotten out of November 2019, which I particularly like because that was the month of Blade Runner and Replicants, we haven't left bots behind us because, as both you and Matt have been alluding to, Cyber Monday is so named because everyone is spending their time at work and their high-speed data connections looking for deals for online shopping. But they're not the only ones interacting with e-commerce because that's where the bots are. So Sandy, with a little bit of that introduction, let's talk about bots and what your recent research has been looking at.
So we have been looking at bot management platforms and looking at how they have grown and how they've emerged. A few years ago, we mostly would look at web application firewalls for protection. But over the past few years, I think people have realized WAFs are not enough. That, a bot, whether it's good or malicious, is going to take advantage and take approaches that a WAF is not going to catch. And so a WAF might detect some things, but it's not going to be able to stop many of the fraudulent attacks. It's not going to prevent the increase in traffic. And a lot of the fraud that you're seeing, particularly around something like Cyber Monday, it could include things like hoarding in shopping carts so that you can't get that great deal that's only available for 30 minutes. Or it could involve ticketing, trying to buy up all of the tickets to a limited show and then reselling them or scalping them. It could include credential stuffing, buying a bunch of credentials off of the dark web and seeing which ones work on another site. Those are some common bot applications and use cases. But organizations are finding that, their traditional application security protections in production aren't enough, and they're moving much more into the bot management space and really looking at what's out there. And you're seeing the real explosion of bot management companies, even in the last 18 months. In the process right now of revising the new tech on bot management. And what's really amazing is just the number of companies, both startups and more mature existing organizations that have really invested in this space. 2 years ago, we had maybe 15 to 20 companies in total. And this year we had to cap it at 40. It's really been a really exploding space.
So Sandy, you talk about aspect. I mean, let's get into some nuances here for a second, because I think this is a really interesting space, right? We think of all traffic the same on the internet, but it's not,
Nope.
right?
No.
I think stats I've seen are things like half of all traffic on the internet is bots, and 1/3 of all internet traffic is malicious bot traffic. I mean, are those roughly right numbers from the amount of bot traffic that's actually out on the internet?
Matt, the stats I've seen vary, but the latest ones I've seen have a little under 40% of all internet traffic is bots, and over half of that is malicious bots. The good traffic includes things like, Google and web crawlers and partner bots that you don't want to block. You rely on and you need those bots. But then there are all of the malicious ones as well.
And so so I think this is one of the big challenges, right? There's a couple things. The WAFs may not be able to discern good from bad traffic, right? Bot traffic, or even traffic from bot traffic. So we may want to break that down a second. But then the bigger challenge is, if you can discern what is bot traffic, then you have to figure out what is good versus bad bot traffic. And that requires a level of sophistication that I think these platforms have that maybe the WAFs themselves didn't have. Is that true?
There's absolutely that. There's also, you think about WAFs, they were developed for OWASP top 10. So if you're using bots in order to crawl a site and search for vulnerabilities that you can exploit later, a WAF may catch some of that. But bots used for fraud are often attempting something that might look like a legitimate transaction. They're attempting to log in, or they're attempting to try to pay with a gift card. And maybe the bot is just increasing the numbers on the gift card every time, hoping to find one that's open and available. But it doesn't necessarily get detected as an application attack in the same way. So a lot of that fraudulent activity isn't going to be caught by a WAF. That's sort of the distinction I think we're looking at, Matt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And then from a good versus bad, that requires some understanding of how the application's supposed to work, what the bot's trying to do, and then somehow put some behavior analytics around it to say that's good versus that's bad. That's an interesting challenge too.
It is. There are certain bots that we know the signatures of and we can whitelist. We know what to expect with Google crawlers, for example. We know what that looks like. But we also know with that maybe we don't always want it going at the same rate. On Cyber Monday, for example, your priority, if you're an e-commerce site, is you want to get customers in and you want them to be able to buy. So maybe you need to slow down the traffic, even of some of your good or partner bots, in favor of letting more humans in. So that's the other element of it. You can know which bots are good bots, but you don't always want them at the same rate.
Interesting.
That's pretty interesting too, because you've been, as you're saying, that WAFs are sort of the focus on the OWASP top 10. I was about to say old school type of attacks. These attacks still exist today, so they're not necessarily
Right.
old school. But the techniques, the countermeasures are very simple in the sense you were describing. Crawl the website, look for those vulnerabilities, attempt to exploit them. As you're describing here, a lot of these types of fraud scenarios, you've basically described interacting with an application in a legitimate manner. So one of the things I also imagine too is that countering these bots probably also cannot just be, let's block the IP address and we've solved the problem. What have been some other ways that you've seen a lot of these platforms and these countermeasures try to work against the bots to impact them from, basically to counter them?
The top bot management platforms, the detection is incredibly sophisticated. Some of them are using hundreds or even thousands of different signals tied to the request or transaction in order to help identify, is this a bot or is this a human? And so there's that element. Some of the bot management platforms have some pretty detailed machine learning around behavioral analysis, and really tying that all together to not only search for some of the basic bots, which are easier to find, but also search for more sophisticated bots that act more like humans. And those are the more challenging ones. It's sometimes easier to find bots that, behave like bots, but not every bot behaves like a bot or like what we think a bot acts like. So that's
Right.
the other element of it.
But hopefully that doesn't mean that all these detection mechanisms are throwing up CAPTCHAs, because every once in a while the CAPTCHA gets in front of a human. So is basically our future going to be deciphering all of these letters and numbers, or figuring out, is this a street light, or are these 3 pixels in this one box a street light, or is there a little bit of better hope for us humans?
I saw something on Twitter over the weekend. Someone was faced with a CAPTCHA in another language. So how hopeless is that? No. The goal with bot management solutions is to have a degree of accuracy and small enough number of false positives that they are not throwing up challenges and CAPTCHAs. And even if they do need to do an occasional challenge, it could be a JavaScript challenge to the browser that is completely invisible to the user, or if you need something more human, a couple of organizations, a couple of vendors have started to create different types of CAPTCHAs that are a little more usable and aren't relying on you to figure out, what does a taxi look like? Is this a traffic light? Is this little corner here of a traffic light in this square actually count as a traffic light? I hate those, you hate those, everybody hates those, right?
Yeah, or the letters and the numbers that are so obscured that it's like, really, it looks like a J, or it looks like a 7 or a what, and then it's like, no, it's invalid, and then you're doing it again. And some of these things are so distorted that even a real human can't figure them out.
Yeah, the interesting thing with bot management is that they really have extended into all sorts of different types of responses. The most basic ones, it might be block and allow and throw out a CAPTCHA, but the ones that have really advanced and are a little more innovative aren't just doing that. They're sending suspected bots over to honeypots, or they're black holing them, leaving the request open but not sending any data, so that you're basically costing the attacker a lot of money with these open connections that never get resolved. Or they're serving up fake data that's useless for the attacker. In a lot of cases, the goal of bot management companies is actually to increase the cost and the economic impact for the attacker, so that the value of a bot attack isn't as high and it's not as valuable for a malicious attacker to go with bots. And that's really the hope. If you actually make it economically infeasible or not viable, they'll go in another direction.
Yeah, and my guess is the market where we stand with bots is so ripe that it's low-hanging fruit at this point for these bots to actually work. They're obviously working, and we've seen this with other attacks before, Sandy. I mean, we can track all different types of attacks, right? At a certain point, you want to put enough safeguards in place that makes it that much more challenging and that much more expensive to build a bot that looks like a human, that those types of attacks stop. Where are we on that spectrum right now?
Not there yet, but better than we were a year ago. I think we've had a number of successes in the industry, vendors that have successfully stopped large-scale bot attacks, and in some cases even managed to help bring up charges against some of the perpetrators. So there's definitely more attention on it from that standpoint. There's still a ton of fraud that's going on. There's still a ton of people that are able to, hoard high-end or specialist merchandise, or limited time stuff. Again, this is the day where everybody has the, 1 hour flash sales of the specialty item that you can only get during that time. And if a bot is able to successfully hoard a lot of that, that's a terrible customer experience for all of your real customers who really wanted that item, right? So what I'd say is that we've definitely advanced, but there's still quite a ways to go. It's definitely an emerging industry, an emerging platform, bot management. So we're getting there.
Now, from an adoption perspective, I mean, are we only seeing adoption at the large kind of online folks right now, or are these technologies cost effective enough, easy enough to deploy, where we can actually go downstream? Or are we just still talking cream of the crop kind of online retailers that can afford and implement these types of solutions?
I think you're seeing it go downstream too, Matt. It's interesting because bot management itself started from a number of different areas. There was a lot initially in the marketing fraud and the ad fraud, identifying bots that were making your advertising budget pretty useless. We're clicking on a bunch of things and not really giving you value for your ad budget, or focused on marketing fraud. And a lot of them have evolved into covering things like credential stuffing and web scraping for purposes of identifying vulnerabilities and things like that. So the evolution of where bot management has come from varies. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of is web application firewall vendors are realizing that they alone aren't the right answer to address bots, and they are either adding bot management to their solution or they're acquiring bot management companies. We've seen a couple of large acquisitions in the last year, where good-sized WAF vendors have acquired bot management, or they have added bot management to their platforms.
Yeah, I mean, we've always known that web application firewalls had a specific purpose, but they couldn't do some of the more advanced stuff. And, with moving to the cloud and a lot of the things that have been going on with the move of the application, I think a lot of these WAF vendors have had to try to figure out how to reinvent themselves. This is one area where I think the legacy WAF vendors realized this was a way to potentially reinvent themselves a bit here, which is good. We've seen other WAF vendors go a little deeper into kind of the runtime application self-protection stuff. Separate segment we should do at some point with you on a deeper dive into the space. But is that what you're kind of seeing? Is each WAF vendor's kind of trying to figure out where their next set of innovations come from, and this is obviously one that's leading the pack right now?
I'm not sure that it's necessarily trying to figure it out, but I do think that a lot of the WAF vendors that we are speaking to are evolving and expanding their offerings and realizing that they want to offer a more complete application security solution. And it may involve bot management. And as you said, it may involve RASP. It may involve client-side protections, code protections, things like that. But there is definitely a bit of a consolidation, I would say. Not that it's becoming, a single platform immediately, but there's definitely a lot of acquisition and sort of aligned products that are being tied in.
Yeah, I mean, this is where things get interesting, right? You said 15 to 20 a year ago. You had to cap it at 40. So you're seeing a lot of growth, a lot of investment in bot management.
Yes.
But here's the reality on the other side. If this is just a feature, then it gets consolidated into a larger application security portfolio. You look at how many of those are out there, there's a limited number from a consolidation perspective. And we started to see this in the endpoint space with some of the recent activity over the last year or so in endpoints. I think at some point we'll probably see the same thing for bot management. I don't know that it's taken the same, I don't know if it's at the same level as endpoint right this second, but there could be some interesting consolidation going forward just because why do you need 40, 50, 60 bot management vendors if there's only, 20, 30 web app security companies?
It's interesting. Mike, you had asked me about what was responsible for the explosion of bot management vendors over the last year, from 15-ish to over 40. And one of the things that happened is a couple of the big folks got bought. And so if you're starting a security company and you see, a couple of leading bot management vendors get purchased for big bucks, well, that makes it a pretty attractive market to get into. So I think, you see the amount of money, you see the investment. There's a huge jump in investment in bot management. And it's not all startups. I mean, that's a thing to point out. A lot of the companies getting involved in bot management are pretty large scale established vendors in the cloud space already. They're either WAF vendors or they're CDN vendors or they're just cloud adjacent in some way, and they're adding this into their portfolio.
Interesting.
But I do think, to your point, that I would not be surprised to see more acquisitions.
Yeah, and so I'm curious, do we also see it in the DDoS guys? Are the DDoS vendors also looking at this bot traffic and some of this bot management as a way to help in DDoS? Because you mentioned the top two, I think WAFs and CDNs, but the other one could be the DDoS guys. Are we seeing that same, some of those capabilities coming into the DDoS vendors as well?
I don't spend as much time with the DDoS vendors, so I probably can't say. It hasn't come up in my conversations, but I haven't dove in as much there. It's mostly come from the WAF vendors at this point, but keep in mind some of the WAF vendors also have a DDoS component. So,
yeah. Sorry, Mike, I was kind of consuming Sandy's time.
No, this is great. Yeah, this is a great conversation, and I was curious to take this in a now to go on a slightly different path because we're talking about, and Sandy, you're describing, several dozen, having to cap this review up to 40. I'm also curious to think of this from the practitioner, from the application owner perspective.
Yeah.
Are there certain things that are important to look out for, whether it is in the deployment model, whether it's more like the WAF or the fronting the web application, and they're terminating the TLS connection and inspecting traffic, or is it more, or are there aspects of dropping in a JavaScript shim on the client site to do the detection that way? So my question more is, do you see large hurdles or things that are difficult still for application owners to deploy these types of countermeasures? And what can they look out for in terms of getting the most out of one of these platforms?
So let's talk, Mike, about a couple of questions to ask, and I want to unpack a couple of things you said there. You talked about SSL termination, and one of the things that we do look at sometimes is just, how does this all need to be deployed and put together? Reality, you don't want to be decrypting and then encrypting and then decrypting and encrypting again. So you probably need your bot management, right before your WAF or something like that in order to help with performance. There was another part of the question. Oh yeah. In terms of things to look out for, understanding where your traffic is coming from and making sure that your bot management solution supports not just web traffic, but say API traffic and mobile traffic and all of those things. If you have an application that requires all of that, you want to make sure that you're able to address all of that. You also want to understand what types of detections are in place and what the numbers of false positives are so that you know what you're dealing with there. Not everybody has the same level of detection or includes the same signals. And then understanding the different options for responding to an attack, because there's definitely a lot of variation in terms of the degree of responses available and how much, the availability and how you can set up those rules and what your options are. So knowing how granular and how many different options you want in your responses is going to be something that's going to come up quite a bit, I think, when you're selecting a bot management vendor.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point on the mobile side, right? If we think about the move to mobile transactions, it's potentially an API gateway that the mobile app is communicating to gain access, right? And so your bot management solution may be sitting in front of that API gateway, just like it might be sitting in front of your web app firewall for other traffic, right? And so I think you brought up some really interesting architectural things to think about is depending on how that traffic's coming in, do the solutions support these different models? Because the last thing you want probably is 2 or 3 different bot management solutions.
Right. I mean, if you're getting a lot of mobile traffic or you're relying on API traffic for a number of your applications, whether it's API through your web app or just APIs directly from other systems, if you're not looking at that and looking for bots in that traffic, you're missing a whole chunk of the traffic that's coming into your application. So you need to make sure that your solution supports all of the traffic that you rely on. Absolutely. And yes, to your point, architecting this becomes a pretty big deal. You probably do have your bot management and your API gateway and your WAF back to back to back, right?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, which is more of a DevOps concern when it comes to deploying out aspects of the infrastructure and how those security components get kind of weaved into that deployment model.
Yeah.
I'm curious too if you've seen any of the applications themselves start to build their own countermeasures or their own ways of raising the economics of the attacker's cost for this. And some of the ways I'm thinking of is having a lot of these going through deals, obtaining details can be predicated on actually having an authenticated experience. And on mobile devices, I'm going to imagine or at least make a guess that maybe there's a little bit easier attestation that you have a human on this device and you can pull some secrets or store some secrets into one of their secure enclaves that you can't really do in a browser. So I'm just kind of the bit of a more open question and almost a whiteboarding design kind of question. If you see mobile or the web, if you see these paths diverging where web maybe remains more prevalent with bot traffic and mobile and APIs have some actual possibly some architectural capabilities that can maybe minimize some of this, or it really is a call it the cat and mouse game of for every countermeasure there's something that comes on top where rather than bots throwing in teams of mechanical Turks, for low cost.
I haven't seen anything like that yet, Mike. Not to say that we wouldn't necessarily, but right now it really is, attackers leveraging whatever tools are at their disposal. And, if API traffic or mobile traffic isn't getting checked or validated at the same rate as web traffic, that would be a problem. So, yeah, I don't necessarily see a lot of mobile or API specific solutions. I think there's one vendor that we spoke to that was focused on mobile fraud, but most of them are, started with web and then have added in API and mobile support.
Oh, that's interesting. And I guess, too, let me switch back and talk a little bit just about the nature of these attacks, because you'd mentioned credential stuffing.
Yep.
And in the news just recently, there was Disney Plus when it was launched. There was a lot
Yes.
of news about that and whether it was a breach or whether it was just collected, basically breach data from other areas used for credential stuffing. So that was pretty topical here. We're talking today on Cyber Monday, as we've mentioned, talking about like purchasing e-commerce or ticket sales, for example.
Yep.
I'm curious too, are there other, for other application owners out there that perhaps aren't specifically in an e-commerce? I'm going to guess pretty much everyone has some type of login page, so credential stuffing is
Right.
pretty important. But are there other types of fraud or other types of attacks that you also see that application owners should also be aware of if they think that, well, we don't have Cyber Monday deals, so we probably don't need to worry about bots?
So, as you said, credential stuffing is a huge one, and I don't know. None of us know exactly what happened with Disney Plus, but you can imagine so many people reuse their passwords. If you buy a bunch of stolen credentials from somewhere and try them on another site, that's probably, you're probably going to have some percentage of hits on that, right? So there's that. If you're not in e-commerce, so you're probably not worried about checkout abuse, and you're probably not worried about card fraud or ticketing, you're still going to be worried about sort of general web recon, finding vulnerabilities that you can take advantage of a little bit more later. You might still be worried about ad fraud, because pretty much everyone has some sort of advertising or marketing campaign that they're probably trying to make work, and they want to make sure that they're actually getting value from that versus just having a bunch of bots click on their ads and use up their marketing budget nicely, but not actually get a lot of value for it. The other thing that's interesting, we've talked a little bit about good bots, and Google's an example, but the other thing we're seeing is hedge funds that are putting out essentially good bots to scrape information from various corporate websites in order to ascertain the value of the company and whether they should invest in it, and feed all of that information in. That's an example where it's not a malicious bot, but you do want to make sure that the information being scraped is correct and of value, and isn't going to lead to somebody devaluing your firm or something like that. So that might be something to watch for. It's not necessarily a malicious bot, but it is something to know that, hey, the information that is on your site, is being used in various ways, and bots are leveraging that as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, it's a good point to say that there are, as we say, good bots, bad bots out there as
Yes.
well. And and I think you made also an important distinction at the beginning about distinguishing between them and then deciding what action to take, whether it is, in this case, making sure that data is correct or data is being presented well, or blackholing them or dropping them, dropping the malicious bots into areas that is just going to raise that attacker cost.
Right.
So that's a pretty neat.
Take your malicious bots, black hole them, feed them fake data, make it costly and inconvenient for them. Partner bots and good bots, most of the time you want to let in, but maybe you need to throttle them every so often. Maybe on Cyber Monday, you want to throttle them back a little bit. You still want to let them in, but you want to let them in a little bit slower because your priority is humans at that point. Whereas maybe, 2 weeks ago, you really didn't care as much. So understanding your business cycles to be able to then put in place rules for even how good bots are handled is going to be really important.
That's cool. And so, as I want to ask too, looking ahead, Sandy, you've been doing quite a bit of research. You've been speaking a lot of conferences. Is there anything upcoming that you wanted to highlight that we can look for more of your work?
So, as I mentioned, we are currently working on and finalizing the new tech on bot management that's going to really give you a survey of the bot management space and key players in it and sort of where they fall and different levels of feature focus among different segments. And that's definitely something to watch out for. Also, early next year, going to be working on a general sort of state of application security, talking about how different product segments are being adopted within the market, and it'll be interesting to go through, where organizations are picking up application security tooling and at what part in the development and deployment process, and if that's evolving, and if we are, as they say, shifting left.
Yeah, that sounds like we're going to have you back for that topic. That sounds really interesting for sure.
It'll be a fun conversation. We'll definitely talk about that one.
Excellent. Cool. Well, I want to say thank you, Sandy, for joining us. This has been a great conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. Thanks for having me, Matt. Good talking to you both.
Cool. And yes, and thank you, Matt, as well. And thanks, everyone, for listening. And for those of you who are bots and watching old reruns of Battlestar Galactica, hopefully this helped to provide some additional entertainment for you. And thanks to everyone else for joining. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with News of the Week.